We'll be chatting with him. But first, that very expensive IOU we owe to Europe for the former Anglo-Irish Bank and the former Irish Nationwide Building Society. Ollie Rehn, the EU Economics Commissioner, who we thought was on our side, it took a lot of people by surprise yesterday, saying outright that Ireland must pay that €3.1 billion bank debt and we must pay it on time by the 31st of March. Mr. Rehn broke into Latin pactus servanta, which means you must respect your commitments and your obligations. And we're asking now, do we really have any other choice at this matter? It was the matter was raised in the Dáil. Let's have a listen.
And I think the Taoiseach should first of all tell Commissioner Rehn that we're not given to taking lectures from him. When he said each and every member state respects the commitment it has undertaken, and this is valid in the case of Ireland as well. He went on to tick us off in Latin, no less, about our obligations. Now, before he breaks into Latin, I suggest he should brush up on his Greek, because Greece was the first exception to the rule that he was making yesterday. Spanish was the second exception to the rule that he was making yesterday, and that was only yesterday that Spain was given leeway on its budget deficit.
These negotiations, Deputy Ross, are being conducted by the Troika. And I don't know whether all of the commissioners know all of the details of all of the discussions that are taking place there. You mentioned Latin, and you've mentioned Greek, and you've mentioned Spanish. Always remember, Deputy Ross, that the old Gaelic tongue, in ancient times, was one of the prime languages of Europe. And there's an old saying in there that's very important for everybody to remember, and that is that when negotiations are underway, it's been bail in a hust.
Shane Ross, I have to admit, when I was listening to that live, I was wondering how the Taoiseach was going to finish up with that one.
Yes, good morning. Hi, Jonathan. Yeah, he did well, and he said, really keep your mouth shut. And of course, that's not our job to keep our mouth shut. It was a fairly robust exchange, and I think Taoiseach's probably in a somewhat difficult position on this one, because the ministers have built up, some of his ministers have built up such huge expectations that there will be a deal done of some sort by the 31st of March, because that's the day that the 3.1 billion has to be paid over. And that looks like that Ollie Rehn dashed those hopes yesterday. So he's in a difficult situation, because it looks now as if that deadline, which has been set by his own ministers, is now going to be broken.
I mean, you were putting him under quite a lot of pressure in the Dáil today to explain himself, but you have to accept he can't reveal his hand here. If he is negotiating, even if it is on a medium to long-term deal rather than something this March, he can't tell you what's going on, much and all as he might like to.
No, I think that's true, but then his ministers shouldn't come out and tell us what's going on and tell us porkies, And so, you've got the government talking with two voices in this. You've got some of them raising expectations very definitely and saying, look, this is going to happen. And the Anglo promissory notes are going to be diluted in one way or the other. And him say nothing because we're in the middle of negotiations. The government is on a bit of a spit on this one. And they're also on a spit, of course, because this is, whether they like it or not, in the public mind, and rightly so, I think, tied up with the referendum. So, the public is watching very closely to say, look, if we get relief on this, we'll have a more benign attitude to Europe. Now, when Ollie Rehn comes over here and slaps us down in a pretty patronising way, I mean, he was saying, look, here, Ireland, you guys, you respect your commitments. Everybody's expected to do that, which is a little difficult to take when the Greeks, a few weeks ago, didn't respect their commitments in any way at all and were let off a huge amount of debt. And, of course, the Spanish yesterday were allowed to a lot of leeway on the deficit, which they committed themselves to. So, what I was trying to say in the Dáil there was that there appears to be a bit of an a la carte attitude to the European Fiscal Treaty and to the demands, the fiscal demands which we've got. Spain and Greece seem to get away with quite a lot, one because they're a big country, another because they're a bad country, and Ireland and Hungary as well, actually. But Ireland in particular seems to be compliant and paying the price of being compliant.
Yeah, but we're on the leash. You talk about compliance. We're on the leash already. We have our bailout. We're sticking to the terms of it. The Greeks didn't. They got the deal that, well, they didn't want it, but at least they've got something that, you could view that Ireland might benefit from something similar if it was offered to us. I mean, they don't need to sway us here. Europe really have us where they want us.
They have to a large extent, but wait a minute. What would happen if we took a much harder line on the Anglo bonds and said we can't pay them? We need a deal and we've got to get a deal. What happens if we take a harder line? What strikes me so much about this, and I think you're making a good point, but about all along, ever since November 2010 when the deal with the IMF was there. We never actually stood up for ourselves and said, these things cannot be done, this thing cannot be paid. And what Spain said yesterday was, we just cannot meet this deficit, this budget deficit requirement, simply because our unemployment rate is so high. It would be intolerable for us. I think we can make the same case on the Anglo bonds and say, look, we were screwed on these, we can't pay them, it's not our fault, and we're not going to pay this amount, like it or not. See what happens. You know, they understand that language. They understand it fully. And it's quite obvious from both Greece and Spain that that's what makes them tick. Now, Ireland has been incredibly compliant, and every time the ECB says jump, we do say how high. Every time we put down on the table the Anglo bonds, the ECB has said no, and we've said okay. It's time, I think, we said, look, we're in the same category as these other countries, and we're not going to be, eating at the table d'hôte, in other words, the set menu, while other countries are actually getting the a la carte menu.
Yeah, but we listen to government ministers, and we've paid attention to what Michael Noonan has been saying. He said, well, a deal might be done, it might not be done by the 31st. Joan Burton saying, well, she was linking, even though Enda Kenny slapped her down on that afterwards, to the fiscal compact, and Brendan Howlin comments he's made in the past. But really, the question we're asking the Taoiseach at the moment, he simply can't answer, because he's the guy who's in there doing these negotiations. I mean, we can ask him how many times we like, or try to guide him how many times like, but he can't reveal his hand.
I think that's true, and I think that's perfectly fair enough. But what he can do is he can say to Ollie Rehn very sternly, you're not being at all helpful in the middle of negotiations supposedly going on, which he's told the Irish people about today, by saying, look, you're going to have to pay this back willy-nilly.
Well, why were you and Jerry Adams putting him under so much pressure in the Dáil then? You have to put him
under pressure. Particularly, I put him under pressure to tell Europe that we want to be part of the a la carte menu. We don't want other countries being treated differently from the way we are, and we don't want Ollie Rehn behaving this very patronising way to Ireland when Greece and Spain are getting different treatment. That's the pressure I was putting him under today. I wasn't really putting him under very much pressure to tell us exactly what the deal was, because I understand that he can't say that, but I was putting him under pressure not to tolerate the European commissioners treating us like that, and to keep his ministers in check, and not to say things which are obviously not in tandem with government policy.
Do you think that we might have annoyed the European officials? I mean, the point was being raised on Newstalk Breakfast this morning that by journalists asking all of these questions of the likes of Ollie Rehn and others in the European Commission, that we're getting their backs up, not the government.
I think that's possible. I think that's fair enough. I mean, if their sensitivities are such that they don't like questions coming from Irish journalists asking about the Anglo-Irish promissory notes, I don't think there's an awful lot can be done about it, because there is a huge hunger amongst Irish people to see this settled in our favour, and to see that we get either a write-off or certainly a postponement of the payment for this. And if we are getting up their noses, I'm sorry, I think that's probably quite a good thing.
Do you accept at this point, though, that the March 31st deadline, that isn't going to pass without this 3.1 billion being paid over, and that it is a more medium-stroke long-term deal that's going to be struck, if we're going to strike anything?
I don't know. I don't know, because I don't know what's going on behind closed doors. And, there's still a briefing here today, quietly, that there might be something done Leinster House vote by the 31st of March. And, Michael Noonan, as you said, he said yesterday, something might be done, something might not be done. I think they're still hopeful, and there are ministers on the record saying it would be done by the 31st of March. So I think they'll still be pushing for it to be done, but I think it's looking obviously much less likely, and I think the government is acutely embarrassed by the fact that Europeans have found that here in Ireland they've been briefing it'll be done by that date, and the Europeans are very annoyed by it.
OK, let's talk about the fact you're in Leinster House, you're in the Dáil, as we heard earlier on. This idea that we were going to get the hardest working government in Irish history, and there was going to be a 50% increase in Dáil sitting days, and I read in the papers this morning that TDs have been given a day off next Tuesday to recover from St. Patrick's Day, when the rest of us have to go back to work.
It's ridiculous. I mean, This government is completely phony on the issue of Dáil reform and committee reform and Oireachtas reform. They've done a very clever job on window dressing. Let me just address your point about the bank holiday next Monday. Yeah, this is an absurd relic of history, that every time there's a bank holiday, the Dáil then which is on a Monday, the Dáil then takes the Tuesday off. I can't understand it. It's something which is completely inexcusable and shouldn't be done. They offer all sorts of technical reasons about questions not being able to be answered by civil servants on the Monday, and therefore we can't have the questions answered on the Tuesday on the order paper, so we have to go to the Wednesday. That's nonsense. They could do it on the Friday or the Thursday, or they could leave it for a day. That this is the pattern of kind of window dressing and cosmetic Dáil reform that we've had. We've had longer days, but the Fridays are a bit of a joke. The Friday.
Well, nothing is achieved on the Friday. Did you just go in there and a debate is had with no one in the chamber? No votes are taken.
Well, we've had a couple of bills. Exactly, we've had a couple of bills taken, particularly from the independent group, on the Friday. But the point of the matter is, as you say, you take no votes. But why do you take no votes? No vote can be taken on anything at all, because it lets all the government deputies away out into their constituencies. That's the decision being taken. But it's meant to fool the public that, hey, the Dáil's sitting today, there's a lot going on, and we get a Ruckus report and a bit of the news, and people think, look, there's a lot going on. An awful lot of people have gone home and they're paired, but there's a kind of semblance of something going on as well. The same thing is happening in the committees, where the government again promised committee reform, and that really was hopeful. And I really thought there's going to be something happening with committee reform. They have changed. They've abolished one or two committees. They've shuffled them around a bit. But the real fundamental problem, really fundamental changes, haven't taken place. The committees have got absolutely no power. They've got absolutely no teeth whatsoever. For instance, if I can I just give you one example?
Go on, give us one. We have a bit of time.
The Transport Committee, which I was involved in last time, not this time, Leah Varadkar, who really is committed to abolition of the quangos and to changing in committee structures, promised that the chairman of various semi-state bodies would come before committees, right? Which was a wonderful thing before ratification. In other words, the committees would interview them, people would see them on television and say, are these guys suitable or are they not? That was a great election promise. It was in the programme for government. What has actually happened, instead of them coming before committees, being interviewed and being scrutinised prior to appointment, the guys are now appointed, right? First, right? And
then paraded before you.
Then they're paraded for a very, very short period of time. The committees have absolutely no power to either refuse them or not to refuse them. The report of those proceedings, which, by the way, I read the transport one on the 4 CIE people the other day, is extraordinarily. It goes to the committee. The report of the proceedings goes to the committee. They are not ratified. It's a very short thing. And they go before them. They ask them a few questions. There's about 20 members of that committee. It's a complete fiasco. It's a charade. And that happens across the board now. And we're getting all these kind of dilution of the electoral promises.
But they're very busy, Shane. They're running the country. They're deciding to do a lot of different issues. They've got the promissory notes. They can't turn their attention to everything that they would have promised.
They can certainly introduce Dáil reform. There was very little happening in the Dáil today. Yesterday, there was an extraordinary release of stuff about lobbyists, which was actually submissions to some committee about lobbyists, which was released by the department. They're now going to, on lobbyists, which is a big issue for us, on lobbyists, do you know what they're going to do now? They're going to have a conference, and then after they have a conference, they're going to have a policy paper.
This sounds very familiar.
Yeah, nothing at all. This is wafer-thin commitment to reform. It's not happening. They're just kind of putting the dressing on what Fianna Fáil did. That's all.
All right, Shane Ross, Independent TD, thanks very much for talking to us this afternoon, Shane. An interesting point that was in one of the newspapers as well. Not only are they taking next Tuesday off in the Dáil, but then they've only another 5 days before they have their Easter break. They're getting 19 days holidays at Easter. 19 days. The last time that 19 days was on the Easter holiday for the TDs and the senators was actually when Bertie Ahern's government was in place back in 2008. So what does that tell you about commitment to Dáil reform? Anyway, lots more still to come on this. 53106